It's Friday, it's 12:15 and this is Politics UK. Welcome to your weekly roundup of parliamentary highlights. I'll be joined by correspondents in Belfast, Edinburgh and Cardiff, and here in Westminster by our parliamentary correspondent Susan Hume. On the programme this week, a new session of Parliament begins.
It's Black Rod. Open the door.
Mr. Speaker, the Queen commands this Honourable House to attend her Councillors of State immediately in the House of Peers.
In the absence of the Queen, Prince Charles delivers the government's plans for the year ahead.
Her Majesty's government's priority is to grow and strengthen the economy and help ease the cost of living for families.
And behind the smiles, a warning from the Prime Minister.
We cannot simply spend our way out of this problem. We need to grow out of this problem.
It's the latest chapter in a pathetic response to the cost of living crisis.
And after Sinn Féin tops the poll in Northern Ireland, the Brexit trade deal is back on the agenda.
I will not leave this House until this protocol issue is resolved. I will not leave this House until I can be sure that our political institutions in Northern Ireland have a stable foundation.
Let's start here in Westminster with Susan Hume. Susan, Parliament was back on Tuesday after a short recess in which an awful lot has happened, including the various UK-wide elections, including those for the Northern Ireland Assembly. And we had a dramatic statement from the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, saying that he would resign if he was found to have broken lockdown rules and fined. And we also heard there in the headlines this week in Parliament, it's all been about the Queen's speech. And it was a Queen's speech without a Queen.
Yes, of course. I mean, one of the biggest traditions about the state opening of Parliament is the Queen, because for 70 years she has always opened Parliament, except on two occasions very early on in her reign when she was very pregnant. So that was the big change. However, there was still a lot of the tradition. There was still the scarlet and gold. There were trumpets and a few horses, although the royal party of Prince Charles, Prince William and Camilla, Prince Charles's wife, they didn't arrive by horse-drawn coach. They came by car instead, albeit rather nice cars. The crown was not resting on the Queen's head as it normally does. It was on a cushion, and the monarch's throne had been removed, so Prince Charles delivered this speech from the consort's throne instead. On the other hand, as I say, there's still a lot of tradition there. We still had Black Rod summoning the Commons down to the other end of Parliament to hear the Queen's speech in person. Well, as you say, there's nothing quite like the pageantry with the Queen's speech and the opening, state opening of Parliament. As we mentioned, it was Prince Charles who delivered the Queen's speech, and there were 38 bills. Yes, so a speech, of course, written by the government with all of its bills, its programme for the year to come. There were some bills that were carried over from the previous session that they didn't manage to get into law, such as the Online Safety Bill, which aims to get rid of some of the harms associated with social media. Also some touchstone issues for the government, such as the Levelling Up Bill and a Brexit Freedoms Bill, which is designed to get rid of some of the red tape that is associated, they say, with the EU. So quite a lot in there.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, Her Majesty's government's priority is to grow and strengthen the economy and help ease the cost of living for families. Her Majesty's government will level up opportunity in all parts of the country and support more people into work. Her Majesty's ministers will continue to support the police to make the streets safer and fund the National Health Service to reduce the COVID backlogs. In these challenging times, Her Majesty's government will play a leading role in defending democracy and freedom across the world. A bill will be brought forward to drive local growth, empowering local leaders to regenerate their areas and ensuring everyone can share in the United Kingdom's success. The planning system will be reformed to give residents more involvement in local development. Her Majesty's government will continue to seize the opportunities of the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union to support economic growth. Regulations on businesses will be repealed and reformed. A bill will enable law inherited from the European Union to be more easily amended. Her Majesty's government will protect the integrity of the United Kingdom's borders and ensure the safety of its people. Her Majesty's ministers will take action to prevent dangerous and illegal channel crossings and tackle the criminal gangs who profit from facilitating them. Legislation will be introduced to ensure the police have the powers to make the streets safer.
And a historic moment, of course, because it was the first time the Prince of Wales has stood in for his mother and outlined the government's agenda. Once all the pomp and pageantry, of course, is over, the House of Commons begins 5 days of debate on the Queen's speech.
That's right. Bit of a break for lunch and then it's down to business. And as you say, 5 days of debate. Not continuous days. They are allowed breaks overnight to sleep and they have the weekend off. So it's the main party leaders who speak first, and they got very much down to the nuts and bolts of the legislation, but the focus very much was on some of the big issues facing the country, in particular that rising cost of living.
We need a government of the moment, with the ideas that meet the aspirations of the British public. This thin address, bereft of ideas or purpose, without a guiding principle or a roadmap for delivery, shows just how far this government is from that. This government's failure to grow the economy over a decade, combined with its inertia in the face of spiralling bills, means that we are staring down the barrel of something we haven't seen in decades, a stagflation crisis. It is a truly shocking legacy of this government. It should humble those on the benches opposite who've ignored the red lights on our economy.
The cost of the pandemic has been huge, with the biggest fall in output for 300 years, the necessitated government expenditure of £400 billion. And the aftershocks are still being felt across the world, with a global spike in energy prices, the impact we're seeing on the cost of food. And it's precisely because this government got the big calls right and made the tough decisions during the pandemic that we had the fastest economic growth in the G7 last year, and will return to that status, by the way, by 2024, Mr. Speaker, and therefore have the fiscal firepower to help families up and down the country with all the pressures they face now. And we will continue to use all our ingenuity and compassion for as long as it takes. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, and I will be saying more about this in the days to come.
Let me remind the words to the Prime Minister of Parnell, who used to sit on these very benches. No man has the right to fix the boundary of the march of a nation. No man has the right to say to his country, thus far shalt go and no further. Mr. Speaker, time and time again, the people of Scotland have spoken, and they want a choice. The choice to choose our own future. They spoke in the last Holyrood election, and they spoke again last Thursday. And the longer that Scottish democracy speaks, the louder it will get. If the Conservatives want to stand in the way, if they want to try and deny democracy, then they should well be warned. Democracy will sweep them away, just as their party was swept away last week.
What everyone really needs is an emergency tax cut. And that's why Liberal Democrats want an immediate cut in VAT. Our VAT cut idea would help everyone, would help small businesses and high streets, and would cut inflation. Yet by failing to cut VAT, by choosing to make the cost of living emergency worse, this government has confirmed people's deep fears that they are government that just doesn't care.
A flavour of that debate. Susan, we'll come back to you in just a moment and we'll talk a little bit more about the Queen's speech. But first to Stormont, where members of the Legislative Assembly are meeting in the aftermath of elections to the devolved Parliament. Our reporter, Jim Fitzpatrick, is there. Big changes, Jim, in the party's fortunes from those elections. What are we expecting to happen next?
Well, Joe, yes, it is all change here, and in other ways, perhaps it is business or lack of it as usual. So what we have is we've got a new top party, that's Sinn Féin. The Irish Nationalist Party has been returned with 27 of the 90 seats here at Stormont. That's no change for them, but the DUP have moved from the first position to the second position, dropping 3 seats to 25. After that, the big winners of the election were the Cross Community Alliance Party, now on 17 seats and more than doubling their representation here at Stormont. Then we have the Ulster Unionists down 1 seat to 9 and the SDLP down 4 to 8. Now, if those parties were to form an executive, what we would have would be a Sinn Féin First Minister, a DUP Deputy First Minister, and then they would also have positions in government along with the Alliance Party and the Ulster Unionists. But they're not going to form an executive, and that's because the DUP withdrew from government here in February at protest at the workings of the Northern Ireland Protocol, that part of the Brexit withdrawal agreement that keeps Northern Ireland within the EU's single market for goods. And now the party has clarified after the election that it will not be returning to government here at Stormont until its concerns on that are addressed. So without the DUP nominating a Deputy First Minister, there is no collective government, but what we do have is those ministers that were in place before can remain in post in a caretaker capacity while negotiations continue. That can last for up to 6 months, and if there's no resolution then, we'll have to have another election.
Right. In the meantime, what has the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, said about where his mind is going to be focused in the coming weeks?
Well, he is, of course, an MP, and he is now, after the election, been elected here to Stormont as an MLA. Under the rules, you can't do both. And he has said that he wants to stay at Westminster. And his party can now nominate someone who perhaps didn't even stand in the election to fill his seat here at Stormont. Now, of course, he was quizzed about this issue during the campaign, and his stock answer was often that he would like and intended to lead his party from here at Stormont. But what he's now clarified is that he will intend to stay at Westminster until his concerns on the protocol are resolved. So it gives us some idea of how long these negotiations could continue and how long it could be before we have fully working, functioning devolved government here at Stormont.
Jim, thank you very much. Jim Fitzpatrick there at Stormont. Let's return to Westminster with Susan and continue on this theme of the Northern Ireland Protocol that Jim was talking about there, because it was also brought up in the debate following the Queen's speech. And there was a passionate exchange, wasn't there, between the DUP leader in Westminster, Geoffrey Donaldson, and the former Prime Minister, Theresa May.
That's right. And, of course, the protocol doesn't actually come up in the Queen's speech, but there have been reports that the government might be thinking of bringing forward legislation to unilaterally change its Brexit agreement with the EU in order to stop these checks that the protocol brings in between goods coming from Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, little bit of recent history. You'll remember that what finished off Theresa May as Prime Minister was her failure to get her Brexit deal through the House of Commons. She was meant to have had an agreement with the DUP to support her, but they didn't. She didn't get a Brexit deal through, and that ushered in Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. He had his own Brexit deal. It was a Brexit deal that did include this protocol that the DUP find so distasteful. However, he got a big majority. It was his Brexit deal that went through. So maybe there was just a little bit of bitterness from Theresa May when she was saying to the DUP, if you'd backed my Brexit deal, maybe you'd have had a situation that you would have liked better. And she was also critical of any suggestion that the government might unilaterally, off its own bat, tamper with the Brexit deal that they agreed in the end.
I note that there is no reference to what has been referred to in the papers as a bill in relation to, and I'm going to use the word, the Northern Ireland Protocol, and possibly to varying the terms of the treaty unilaterally. Can I say to my right honourable friend, and he will not be surprised if I say this, that I do not feel that that would be the right move for the government, that I think the government needs to consider not just some immediate issues, but also the wider sense of what such a move would say about the United Kingdom and its willingness to abide by treaties which it has signed. I will give way to the right honourable.
I thank the former Prime Minister for giving way. Can I say to her, with great respect that I hold her in, that surely what is more important here is the Good Friday Belfast Agreement and the need to protect the political institutions. I stood in the election last week. Not a single unionist member was returned to the Assembly that supports the protocol. There is no consensus for this. It needs to be dealt with. It is harming our economy. It is driving up the cost of living. It is undermining political stability in Northern Ireland. It threatens the Good Friday Agreement. It has to be dealt with.
Say to the right honourable gentleman that I put a deal before this House which actually met the requirements of the Good Friday Agreement and actually enabled us not to have a border down the Irish Sea or to have a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Sadly, the DUP and others across this House chose to reject that, but it was just such an opportunity for what he wanted.
Last Thursday, I stood for election in my constituency of Lagan Valley. I've had the honour, Madam Deputy Speaker, of representing this beautiful constituency for the past 25 years in this House. But I believe in Northern Ireland, I believe in the future, and I believe I can play a role in strengthening the political institutions. And that's why, in response to the points that have been made, I'm prepared to commit the remainder of my political career to going back to those institutions and working with my colleagues to make them work. I am prepared to leave this House I've been a member of for 25 years and which I would dearly love to continue being a part of, because I want to invest in the future of our people. I want to work for our people. I want to deliver good government. But I have to say to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will not leave this House until this protocol issue is resolved. I will not leave this House until I can be sure that our political institutions in Northern Ireland have a stable foundation. That means, and I say this in conclusion to the government, the words in the Queen's speech are there, but they have to be matched by action.
Well, an impassioned speech there in the House of Commons, really, from the leader of the DUP in Westminster, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, and we'll have a lot more on the protocol in the coming weeks. Let's find out what's been happening in Holyrood this week with our reporter, Jenny Davidson. Jenny, in the Scottish Parliament, that issue of ferries is back. In fact, it never really went away. We've heard about it a few times before, and it is something of an ongoing saga. There has been a new development this week, hasn't there?
That's right, a new development, a new document found. Now, this is part of this ongoing controversy about the signing of a contract in 2015 for 2 publicly owned ferries, currently running 5 years late and 2.5 times over budget. The key question being why the Scottish Government backed the signing, the awarding of the contract to Ferguson's shipyard, despite warnings that the normal guarantees were in place. And there's been a lack of documentation about who in the Scottish Government signed off and why. Now, just this week, ahead of a Conservative-led debate on ferries, the Scottish Government turned up an email exchange between civil servants in the Finance and Transport departments, and at the bottom of that, they found that key confirmation that the then Transport Minister, Derek Mackay, was the one who said, go ahead with that deal.
I have some good news to share with Parliament. And indeed, Presiding Officer, I have that good news literally here in my hand. The missing document has been found. Ministers were advised of this by officials shortly before noon today, and I wanted to take the first available opportunity to give Parliament this news. The document is an email that makes clear who approved the decision to award the contract to build vessels 801 and 802 to Ferguson's shipyard. sent in response to the key submission on the 8th of October 2015. It is dated 9th of October at 14:32, and it reads, "The Minister is content with the proposals and would like them to be moved on as quickly as possible, please." Presiding Officer, the email was sent by the Office of the Minister of Transport and Islands. Presiding Officer, I hold in my hand that irrefutable documentary evidence that this decision was made rightly and properly by the then Transport Minister, Derek Mackay.
So what the email just read out does not say is why the decision was taken and why the advice not to award that contract was ignored. Nor does it say whether there were discussions between Mr Mackay and Mr Brown and Mr Swinney and Ms Sturgeon, does it?
Well, this has actually opened up a whole other can of worms, because the same email exchange asks a civil servant to inform Deputy First Minister John Swinney in his role then as Finance Secretary about the decision to award the contract. And in a particularly memorable turn of phrase, it asks the civil servant to confirm with him the absence of banana skins. Now, since then, there's been a whole bunch of banana skins, and that has turned the focus onto John Swinney.
Now, that question about John Swinney's involvement came up at First Minister's questions too, didn't it?
That's right. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross has suggested that this new document shows that actually it was John Swinney who gave the final sign-off to the decision rather than Transport Minister Derek Mackay. And as he put it, he's questioned why John Swinney then ignored all those banana skins. The First Minister disputing this interpretation of events and saying that's not what the email exchange says. But also, in a slightly embarrassing turn for the Scottish Government, the Conservatives pointed out that there's a bit of a mistake with the redaction of the documents. You can actually see underneath the redacted parts, and there's a comment warning that the contract might be open to legal challenge.
They published a series of responses to the requests for more information that were heavily redacted, lines blacked out. Except they've done such a poor job at redacting the documents, if you copy and paste them into Microsoft Word, the information is revealed. In one section of the redacted document, it warns of a risk of legal challenge for this contract. It states, and I quote, "The impact of a successful legal challenge could be high. In the worst case, the contract could be declared ineffective." The most crucial document in this affair is still missing, the one that explains why John Swinney charged ahead against expert advice.
Let me read out the bit that Douglas Ross didn't read out. So after he now understands the background, it goes on to say, and that Mr Mackay has cleared the proposal. Now, had Douglas Ross read out that bit, of course, his entire argument here would have fallen to pieces. So it is a bit misleading, I think, Presiding Officer.
We've since spoken to John Swinney, and he denies giving the final approval, saying he didn't give the final nod. His role was just to agree that it was in the budget that they'd agreed in advance, which it was at the time. But the question being, if he didn't know about the financial risks, is that a systemic problem?
Well, Jenny, I don't think this will be the last word on the whole ferries saga, but on another story completely, there were calls this week for the First Minister to convene an urgent summit on abortion. Tell us about it.
Yes, this comes in the context of the potential reversing of abortion rights in the US and also protests here in Scotland. Labour MSP Monica Lennon calling on the First Minister to urgently chair a summit on abortion.
To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will convene an emergency summit on abortion healthcare in response to anti-abortion rights action in Scotland and around the world.
First Minister. Women have the right to access abortion without fear or intimidation. To that end, let me say again to anyone wanting to protest against abortion, do it outside Parliament. Protesting outside hospitals or sexual health clinics targets women, not lawmakers, and it causes stress and anxiety to those accessing healthcare. That, in my view, is deeply wrong. I strongly support the introduction of buffer zones, and the Government is actively considering how this Parliament can legislate in a way that is effective and also capable of withstanding legal challenge. I'm also aware that Gillian Mackay may shortly consult on a Members' Bill. On that latter point about legality, members will be aware that the law on buffer zones passed in Northern Ireland has recently been referred to the Supreme Court. The outcome of that may have relevance for any steps we take here. In the meantime, though, as we consider and hopefully resolve issues around national legislation, we will support any local authority that is willing to use bylaws to establish buffer zones. Finally, Presiding Officer, I am very happy to convene, and indeed I will personally chair a roundtable summit to discuss buffer zones and indeed any other matters that need to be addressed to ensure safe and timely access to abortion services in Scotland within the current law.
Monica Lennon.
Thank you. I warmly welcome the First Minister's agreement to convene an urgent summit that more than a dozen women's organisations have called for, and her personal commitment to chair the talks and facilitate politicians, campaigners and healthcare experts working together is hugely important, and I thank her for this.
Well, in a sense, nothing new, because we already knew the First Minister was in favour of women's abortion rights, but a very strong sense of the direction things will go depending on the outcome of that Supreme Court decision.
Jenny Davidson at Holyrood, thank you very much. Let's return to all things at Westminster. Catch up again with you, Susan. Another issue raised in the Queen's speech was about how to stop illegal immigration and people smugglers. On Wednesday, the Home Affairs Select Committee discussed government plans to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda.
Yeah, so just a reminder, the idea is that asylum seekers who come by unorthodox means, for example, in the boats across the Channel, would be sent immediately to Rwanda, assessed there. If their application for asylum was successful, then they would be allowed to stay in Rwanda, not come to the UK at all. And if it was unsuccessful, they would be sent back possibly to wherever they had come from. Now, the idea behind this, says the government, is that it's a deterrent to stop people making the journey to the UK in the first place. However, it is likely that some people will end up in Rwanda, and there has been concern about whether Rwanda really is a good place to send possibly vulnerable people. So MPs, when a minister was before them, had a lot of questions around that.
I know that the idea is that you want to deter people, smugglers, from coming across, particularly across the Channel in small boats. But I just wonder, could you just explain to the committee what the evidence base is that the policy you've put forward will work?
It is, of course, a new policy. This is a world first in terms of this economic and migration partnership that we've agreed with Rwanda. I doubt that it will be the last of those sorts of agreements that are reached involving countries around the world. But I genuinely do believe that there will be a deterrent effect.
What modelling have you done then to actually give you the evidence base for this decision?
So this is a new and untested policy at this point in time.
This.
Well, one thing I would say, and it's worth actually going back through the Hansard, for example, of the Nationality and Borders Bill Committee, where George Brandis set out, for example, the difference that he believed the approach that they took made in terms of dealing with this in Australia.
So, yeah, OK, we're going to come on to Australia. We have some specific questions. But what I'm interested in, what the modelling that you've done in terms of the effectiveness of this policy, what modelling have you done?
Well, in some ways, you yourself alluded to in your opening questions the fact that this has added a level of uncertainty to migrants choosing to make these journeys. The fact that the uncertainty that you spoke about, in a way, speaks to the uncertainty that this has now introduced.
Mr Hobbs, are you able to help? Is there some modelling to actually underpin this policy?
So, as I think the Minister said, we did look at where other countries have done this. Australia, as part of their wider package of their Sovereign Borders programme, did it. They've had no illegal maritime crossings since 2014. So there is evidence out there that this, as part of a wider package, which is set out as part of the new plan, is part of that.
Do you accept the evidence set out by the US State Department, one of our major allies,
Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, both very internationally respected NGOs. Do you accept the evidence that there have been unlawful or arbitrary killings in Rwanda, forced disappearances and torture committed by the Rwandan government? Do you or do you not accept that evidence?
We have been very clear through the CPIT report in setting out various concerns that have been raised internationally around those sorts of issues. But I go back to the point that fundamentally we do not believe that there are systematic breaches of human rights in a way that would mean that this policy would be inappropriate.
Your government's Foreign Office travel advice advises LGBT British citizens that are planning to go to Rwanda that there are no specific anti-discrimination laws that protect LGBT individuals and that they may experience discrimination and abuse, including from local authorities. So how does that sit with what you just told me a moment ago?
There is an anti-discrimination law that runs through the constitution of Rwanda like a stick of rock. And again, I would make the point that cases will be judged on a case-by-case basis as to whether it is appropriate and safe for those individuals to be removed to Rwanda.
Well, that was that select committee. As we've mentioned, the contents of the Queen's speech are debated over 5 days, and each day covers different issues chosen, actually, by the opposition. One such topic was on preventing crime and delivering justice. What happened, Susan?
Yeah, so one of the things in the Queen's speech really adds on what happened in the last session, where we saw the government trying to clamp down on what they see as disruptive protests, particularly by climate change protesters. One of the things they didn't manage to do was to make it illegal to glue yourself or chain yourself to a motorway or public building. So there's going to be another attempt to do that. And also, we saw the Home Secretary very much trying to come back to that old Conservative idea that they are the party of law and order and Labour isn't.
The Conservative Party is a party of law and order. And unlike some, we understand that freedom includes the freedom of the law-abiding majority to go about their business free from harm. Those on the benches opposite are eager to defend the murderers, paedophiles, rapists, thugs and people with no right to be here. They cheer on the selfish protesters who cause chaos and endanger life. They back people who thwart the removal of foreign national offenders from our country. The Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act was a major step forward, but elements, Mr. Speaker, were frustrated by the unelected other place urged on by members opposite. We will not be deterred from our duty to protect the law-abiding majority from the mob rule and the thuggery that we have seen. And the Public Order Bill combats the guerrilla tactics that will bring such misery to the hard-working public, that disrupts businesses, interferes with emergency services, costs taxpayers millions and puts lives at risk.
I have to say, that was an astonishing refusal by the Home Secretary to take interventions and questions from the Shadow Home Secretary, from the Shadow Cabinet Minister. I've been taking part in Queen's Speech debates for 25 years, and I have never seen a government minister at the dispatch box afraid to take questions from her opposite number. Case after case after case where crimes are being committed but no one is being charged or cautioned or given a community penalty, and no action is being taken, and it is getting worse. Since 2019, since the general election, in fact, since the Home Secretary was appointed to her job, crime is up by 18% and prosecutions are down by 18%. But what is the Home Secretary's response to this? Well, soon after she took up the job, she said, "Let the message go out to the British people, we hear you, and to the criminals, I simply say this, we are coming after you." Well, to the Home Secretary, I simply say this, you better start running faster because they're all getting away.
Combative exchanges there between the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper and the Home Secretary Priti Patel. Thank you, Susan, for now. Let's go to the Welsh Parliament, and our reporter Amelia Bailey is there. This week, Amelia, an announcement that would change the Senedd completely.
Hi, Jo. Yes, that's right. We woke up on Tuesday morning and in our inboxes were plans to change the Senedd almost completely, to increase its numbers by almost half, from 60 members to 96. Now, the thinking behind this is that although the Senate's powers have increased exponentially since its inception, actually the size of it hasn't changed at all. And so by increasing the numbers of Senate members, their workload would be more sustainable and therefore will have better scrutiny of the Welsh Labour government. It's worth noticing as well that in Cardiff Bay, we have far fewer politicians than in Stormont or in Holyrood. And behind the headlines, there were a few key changes to the way we elect our politicians. Currently here, we have a first-past-the-post hybrid proportional system. That will be scrapped completely in favour of a proportional system with inbuilt gender quotas. Constituencies will be redrawn too. We'll have 16 constituencies, each electing 6 members, and those will be made up of 2 Westminster constituencies. And here is how Plaid Cymru and Welsh Labour explain the thinking behind those plans.
Isn't what lies at the heart of it a desire to build here in Wales a modern democracy, abolishing the unfair first-past-the-post system, a fully gender-balanced working parliament committed to making a difference in people's lives, not the gentleman's club come pantomime parliament of Westminster?
People want to see a chamber here that is properly equipped to do the job that we are asked to do. Report after report, commission after commission has demonstrated that with its current membership and the level of responsibilities that are discharged here, you cannot do the job in the way the people in Wales have a right to expect it to be done. The reforms that we've agreed on will put that right, and will put it right not just for the next 10 years, but I think for the foreseeable future.
Now, as Plaid Cymru and Labour are formally working together on this, they do have the 2/3 majority required to pass it in the Senedd. But that doesn't mean that other opposition parties here are particularly happy about it. The Welsh Conservatives are long-time opponents of any increase to the size of the Senedd, but they're saying, you know, why now? Should we really be expecting taxpayers to foot the bill for even more politicians? Previous estimates, which due to various things will be conservative at the moment, put the cost at around £12 million. Alternatively, the Welsh Liberal Democrats are concerned that the proportional system that's been chosen, the DeHont system, means that smaller parties could miss out. And it won't be completely plain sailing for Welsh Labour and Plaid Cymru, because a Senedd committee has been looking at Senedd reform, and they're due to publish their report in around 2 weeks. What if the report's findings don't match up to the current plans that are on the table? So definitely one to watch in the next few weeks.
Absolutely, Amelia. And elsewhere, Welsh Government plans to tackle the NHS backlog were questioned by the Welsh Conservatives.
Yes, that's right. It's all part of a plan by the Welsh Conservatives to go back to bread and butter basics after a set of local election results which saw them lose almost half of their seats in Wales. So back in the Senedd this week, and top of the list was focusing on Welsh NHS staffing levels, and in particular research by the British Medical Association Cymru, which suggests that at almost every level of the Welsh NHS there are staffing issues. And so it was something that was raised by the leader, Andrew R.T. Davies.
There were many themes that were raised with me as I went round Wales, but one of the key themes that came across in all parts of Wales was access to GPs and the ability to get appointments in GP surgeries. And the recent announcement from the Welsh Government over the workforce planning and the money that's going to be made available talks of funding 160 places per year. But according to the BMA, to meet the demand requirement, we're going to need to be funding close to 200 places to make sure that we're replacing people who are retiring or leaving the workforce or reducing their hours.
Now, the plans to tackle these staffing shortages don't just lie with GPs. There are plans to increase the numbers of nurses, pharmacists and other people treating patients at the first point of access. And the Welsh Labour Government have pledged that if the advice is there, they'll increase the number of funded GP places too.
This Labour government has never failed to fund an expansion in the numbers of GP training places when that is the advice that we have had from those who are in the position to carry out that analysis.
And Welsh Conservatives also criticising proposals to introduce a tourism tax to Wales.
Yes, there are tourism taxes in many tourism hotspots, including Edinburgh, Amsterdam and Venice. Now, these are designed so that the money can be put back into the local community to alleviate the pressures by high levels of tourism, so pressure on infrastructure and on services. However, there are voices in the tourism industry in Wales who are criticising any potential plans to introduce them here, saying they could put tourists off, and that's something that the Welsh Conservatives picked up on this week.
Those who stay overnight spend more in the Welsh economy. What your proposals are actually going to do is to penalise people who want to stay overnight. It's not going to actually make much difference to the day visitor market. Do you accept that overnight taxing of individuals who want to visit Wales to spend in our economy could actually do a lot of damage?
I don't accept the member's repeated doomsday predictions for a tourism and its impact on the economy. I have a great deal more faith and optimism about the future of our tourism economy and the ability to have a tourism economy that will continue to employ people on good rates and not have a significantly or detrimental impact on the community in which tourism takes place.
Now, the Welsh Government are launching a consultation on that this autumn, and they say that's the time and place to consider any potential impacts and concerns.
Amelia Belly there at the Senate. Thank you very much. Let's return to Susan Hume here at Westminster. We've got time to bring you one more story. Now, there is a tradition on Queen's Speech Day, isn't there, Susan? Before we get to the sort of serious business, there's a little bit of light-heartedness in the chamber.
Yeah, I don't think Prince Charles had the hardest job, actually, on Queen's Speech Day, even if it was his first time having to read it out. I think it's the two poor MPs who have to propose thanks to the Queen for delivering the speech, or Prince Charles in this case. One is meant to be an old-timer, one a relative newcomer, and as you say, their speeches are meant to be funny. What a burden, a bit like being the best man at a wedding giving the speech, but without even the prospect of a free bar and dancing afterwards.
No pressure.
Let's see how they got on.
Now, no one in politics, Mr. Speaker, minds being senior, but equally no one wishes to be seen as past it. Yet today I fulfil the role of the old duffer. Doing very well. Whose best days are behind him. So, young thrusters, enjoy any department you're in and value it for itself, not just as a stepping stone to something else. After all, as I discovered last September, you never know when you'll prematurely be on the back benches.
Now, on being asked to do this, I turn to some trusted friends and colleagues for advice. The Right Honourable... The Right Honourable Member for South Swindon's instant... It's your fault. Yeah. His instant reaction was, "Oh my God, love, you better be funny." The Honourable Member for the Cities of London and Westminster told me I would be a total mess. And even my dad, a former member and my inspiration in many ways, said after yesterday's rehearsal, "Well, you're going to have to tell the jokes better than that."
Well, they did a good job, rose to the challenge there. But that's all we have time for this week in the roundup of parliamentary news from across the UK. Thank you to Susan Hume and all our correspondents. And I'll be back with Politics Live on Monday at 12:15. Until then, have a very good weekend.